thought he could trade my worth for a life of crime, but he didn't realize he was dealing with the woman who owned the house, the business, and the trap he just walked into. I didn't just walk away from the relationship, I burned his entire world to the ground. The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of expensive truffle oil, and the kind of suffocating silence that only happens when someone has just said something unforgivable. Across the table, Mark was swirling his wine, his expression one of bored indifference. He had always had this way of looking at me, like I was a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of reupholstering. I had spent 3 hours getting ready, trying on 4 different dresses until I found one that hugged my curves just right, only for him to spend the entire appetizer course checking his watch. When I finally asked him why he was acting so distant, he didn't even look up from his phone. He just let out a sharp, dismissive sigh, his eyes scanning my figure with a cold, analytical precision that made my skin crawl. "Honestly, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with a casual, weaponized cruelty, "I'm just not attracted to you anymore. You've let yourself go." It's hard to sit across from a woman who clearly doesn't respect her own body. You're fat, and quite frankly, it's embarrassing to be seen with you. The table seemed to tilt on its axis. The clatter of silverware around us faded into a dull roar, like I was suddenly underwater. I looked down at my plate, then up at his smug, perfectly shaven face. For 5 years, I had been the one keeping the lights on. I had been the one paying the mortgage on the house his name was, conveniently, not on. I had been the one working double shifts while he found his passion for freelance consulting, which mostly involved sitting on our leather sofa in his boxers. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. The hurt didn't vanish, but it transformed. It hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my wine in his face, as tempting as that was. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out a small, velvet-lined box I had been carrying for weeks, and set it on the table. It wasn't a gift for him. "You think this is my body?" I whispered, my voice steady enough to surprise even me. "You think you're in a position to critique me?" "You've been living in my world for a long time, Mark. Maybe it's time you saw what the real world looks like without the safety net I've been providing." He laughed, a dry, mocking sound. "What is this? Another one of your dramatic little outbursts? You're so predictable." I stood up, smoothed my dress, and leaned in close enough to smell the scotch on his breath. "The locks on the house were changed at 6 o'clock this evening," I said, my voice barely a tremor. "Your bags were left on the curb, and I've already contacted your clients. I told them exactly how you've been spending your time and your billing hours. You aren't just single, Mark. You're unemployed, you're evicted, and as of 5 minutes ago, you're officially invisible." His face paled, the smugness evaporating into genuine, wide-eyed terror. He scrambled to grab his phone, his thumbs fumbling over the screen, but his face fell as he stared at the display. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, just as the restaurant manager appeared at the side of our table with a security guard in tow, looking directly at him. "Sir," the manager said, his voice devoid of warmth, "your card has just been declined, and we've been instructed to inform you that you are no longer welcome on these premises. Please leave immediately or we will be forced to call the police." Mark's face shifted from pale to a mottled, angry red. He stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched against the polished hardwood floor, drawing the eyes of every patron in the dining room. He looked at the manager, then back at me, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and the budding realization that the floor was truly falling out from under him. "You did this?" he hissed, his voice trembling with a frantic, desperate rage. "You think you're actually pulling this off? I'm going to call my lawyer. I'm going to ruin you for this. Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" I didn't blink. I pulled a thick manila envelope from my bag, the one I'd been keeping tucked away for months, waiting for the perfect moment to execute the final blow. I slid it across the table, the paper whispering against the linen tablecloth. "I think you'll find that your lawyer is currently busy dealing with the audit I triggered yesterday," I said, my voice ice cold. It's amazing what a few forensic accountants can dig up when they're looking into consulting fees and shell companies. The police are already aware of your little side projects, Mark. You aren't being evicted for being a disappointment. You're being evicted for being a criminal. The restaurant went deathly quiet. Even the clinking of glasses seemed to cease. Mark stared at the envelope, his hands hovering over it like he was afraid of an electric shock. The security guard stepped closer, his posture radiating a firm, immovable authority. "I have nothing to say to you," I continued, turning my back on him to signal the waiter for the check. "The Uber you're taking to the curb is already paid for. I suggest you get in it, because if you aren't off my property by the time I get home, the police report I filed an hour ago will transition from a civil matter to a felony trespassing charge. I have the receipts, Mark, for everything." He let out a ragged, desperate laugh, the sound of a cornered animal realizing the trap was already sprung. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, his eyes gleaming with a manic, dangerous intensity. "You think you're so smart, Sarah. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's in those files in my desk. You think you've purged me from your life? You've only just started the war." He spun on his heel and stormed toward the exit, his movements jagged and frantic. I watched him go, a shiver of adrenaline racing down my spine. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt liberated. Instead, a cold, heavy dread settled into the pit of my stomach. As he reached the glass doors, he paused and looked back at me one last time. Not with regret, but with a terrifying, knowing smile. He pulled a small silver key from his pocket and held it up, catching the light for a split second before vanishing into the night. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that key. It was the only copy of the hidden safe in my office, the one where I kept the personal documents and the emergency cash for my business. I'd told him it was lost months ago. I checked my phone, my fingers fumbling as I opened my security app, the one that monitored the cameras inside my house and my office. My screen flickered, showing a feed of my office space, which was now bathed in the strobe-like red light of a tripped alarm, and sitting right in the center of my desk was a man I had never seen before, holding a crowbar and staring directly into the camera lens with a wicked grin. The red light of the alarm system pulsed against my face, turning my reflection in the dark restaurant window into something blood-soaked and monstrous. The man on the screen, a hulking figure in a dark hoodie, didn't look like a common thief. He moved with a clinical military efficiency, ignoring the expensive electronics and going straight for the floorboards beneath my desk. He wasn't there for my laptop. He was there for the one thing Mark had been desperate to keep me from finding, the ledger that proved Mark hadn't just been stealing my money, but laundering it for people who didn't play by the rules of civil court. My breath hitched. I tapped the screen, trying to zoom in, but the feed cut to black. Connection lost. "Miss?" The waiter stood beside me, looking nervous. "The check has been taken care of by the gentleman before he left. He said to tell you that you've made a tactical error." I didn't answer. I bolted from the booth, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as I sprinted toward the valet stand. The valet, sensing the frantic energy radiating off me, pulled my car around in seconds. I didn't wait for him to open the door. I slid in, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. As I peeled away from the curb, my phone chimed. It was an anonymous text. No number, just a photo. It was a picture of me, taken from a long-distance lens, sitting at the restaurant booth. Beside it was another photo, my front door, standing wide open, swinging in the night wind. "You should have let me stay," the message read. "You have no idea what you just invited into your house." I swerved onto the highway, the speedometer needle climbing toward 80. I wasn't going to the police. I knew the local precinct was underfunded and slow, and I had no guarantee that the people Mark was linked to hadn't already reached out to the department. I had to get to that house. I had to get that ledger before they did. If they got their hands on those documents, I wouldn't just be homeless. I'd be a loose end. As I took the sharp turn onto my street, my headlights swept across the lawn. Everything looked normal at first glance. The hedges were trimmed, the porch light was on, and my neighbor's cat was sitting on the fence. But then I saw it. The front door wasn't just open. It was hanging off one hinge, the wood splintered from a forced entry. I killed the engine 2 houses down and crept toward my property, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I reached into my bag, gripping the canister of pepper spray I'd carried since college, and moved toward the shadows of the porch. The silence was absolute. No sirens, no movement, no sound of the man in the hoodie. I stepped into the hallway, the air smelling of ozone and disturbed dust. I made my way toward my study, my footsteps silent on the carpet. The office door was cracked open. A single lamp was knocked over, illuminating the room in a jagged, flickering yellow. I peeked around the edge of the frame, ready to spray, ready to scream, ready to fight for my life. The office was empty. The floorboards had been ripped up, and the cavity underneath was hollowed out and vacant. But it wasn't the theft that froze the blood in my veins. Pinned to the center of my desk with a serrated hunting knife was the familiar, gold-plated earring. It was one of a pair I had given my sister for her birthday last week. Beneath it, written in what looked like dark red paint, was a single, chilling instruction. Turn around. The scent hit me first, not just the metallic tang of the paint on the desk, but the unmistakable, expensive cologne Mark had worn for years. My heart didn't just hammer, it seemed to stop entirely. I didn't turn around, not at first. Instead, I focused on the reflection in the darkened window of the study. Behind me, standing in the shadows of the doorway, was Mark. But he wasn't the same man who had stormed out of the restaurant 30 minutes ago. He was drenched in sweat, his expensive suit jacket torn at the shoulder, and his hand was gripped firmly around the barrel of a pistol that looked far too heavy for his shaking grip. "You really thought you could just cut me out, Sarah?" he rasped. His voice was no longer bored or mocking. It was raw, unhinged. "I told you this isn't just about money, it's about control. You thought you were the one holding the leash, but you never realized who was actually walking the dog." I slowly raised my hands, feeling the cold air of the room crawl across my skin. "Where is she, Mark?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Where is my sister?" "She's exactly where you left her," he sneered, stepping into the dim light. "Safe and sound in the basement of that little vacation rental you always brag about, the one you never bothered to change the security codes for." I felt a surge of cold, calculated fury, the kind that bypasses fear entirely. I had expected him to be a petty crook, but he was a desperate amateur sadist, and he had made the one mistake every arrogant man makes when they underestimate a woman. He thought I was alone. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice suddenly dropping into a chilling, calm register. "I never changed the codes. I didn't have to." Before he could react, I slammed my heel into the edge of the desk, triggering the silent alarm I had installed specifically for this room. But it wasn't just a police alert. The floorboards beneath his feet, the ones he had carefully avoided while searching for my ledger, were not actually floorboards. They were pressure-sensitive triggers connected to the home's original heavy-duty security system, which I had secretly rewired to include a high-voltage incapacitation grid. A sharp click echoed through the room. Mark's eyes widened as the floor beneath him surged with an electric pulse. He didn't even have time to scream. The force of the current slammed him against the wall, the gun flying from his hand and sliding harmlessly into the dark hallway. He crumpled to the floor, twitching, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as the high-voltage discharge rendered him completely immobile. I didn't hesitate. I vaulted over the desk, grabbed the hunting knife from the wood, and pinned his wrist to the floor with a swift, brutal motion. "You're going to give me the location of the rental, and then you're going to call the people you think you're working for," I said, leaning down until I was inches from his terrified, bug-eyed face. "You're going to tell them that the police are on their way to this address, and that if anything happens to my sister, I've already sent the digital ledger, the real one, the one I didn't keep in this house, to every major investigative outlet in the city." He stammered, his lips numb from the shock. I can't. They'll kill me." "That," I said, standing up and dialing 911 on my phone, "sounds like a you problem." The sirens were already wailing in the distance, a symphony of salvation. I walked to the front door and threw it wide open, letting the cool night air rush in. As the flashing blue and red lights began to illuminate my living room, I looked down at the man who had dared to call me fat, the man who had tried to build a throne out of my insecurities. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like what he was, a transient, broken man with nowhere left to run. I watched the officers swarm the lawn, their weapons drawn, their faces grim. I handed them my phone, the recording of his confession already uploaded to the cloud. As they handcuffed him and dragged him past the threshold, the same threshold he once thought he owned, he didn't look at me with hate. He looked at me with a hollow, crushing defeat. "I am fat," I said to his back, my voice echoing in the quiet night. "And you, Mark? You're just a memory." I didn't wait to watch them load him into the cruiser. I picked up my keys, drove to the vacation house to bring my sister home, and didn't look back at the life I had burned to the ground. Sometimes, to find out who you really are, you have to destroy everything you were told you were supposed to be. And the best part? I never looked back.